I was at home one day in April earlier on this year, although to say I was at home would be a bit of an overestimation. I was in the UK, we had gone into lockdown, and I found myself sitting watching the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, with two of his advisors on either side, giving a daily update on the statistics on coronavirus. They did this every day. And as I sat and watched them do what they were doing, I all of a sudden realized just how hard journalists must be working. The rest of us, well, we were at home. No restaurants, no cafes. You'd go to the supermarket for fun if you wanted to. But journalists were working really hard. Their job is to report the news. To report the news regardless of what the circumstances around them look like. And as I sat watching that daily briefing, I all of a sudden realized just how similar the job of a journalist and the job of a minister, and I'm a minister, is. You see, the news for Christians doesn't change, does it? It's the news that Jesus died and rose again, that he came to bring reconciliation and peace with God. And our job is to proclaim that in season and out of season. And so, as I sat watching those journalists, I realized just how much they'd have to adapt and innovate and how much energy they would need to keep going. I want to tell you a story about adaptation and innovation and change, but it's about someone who doesn't like to do those things. It's the story of how I and some others had the conviction that we still need to proclaim Christ crucified and build community around that life-changing idea, even when we can't gather with one another. It's the story of how some of us planted a congregation from the other side of the world, fully online. And the main learning point for me, and I hope you'll see this, is this: you don't have to be innovative to innovate. You don't have to be an innovator to innovate. Let me tell you how I came to that conclusion by sharing the story with you. I spent 4 months in Scotland this year. That's my native country. I lived in an Airbnb along with my wife and our then 6-month-old daughter, family just down the road. We couldn't return to Australia. The borders were shut. There were no flights out. We weren't even allowed back in because of our visa. And on top of all of that, back here in Sydney, where I now am, our church had amalgamated. Our parish had amalgamated with another parish, and we'd formed a new church. For all the changes that the world was going around, our church out here on the South Head Peninsula, 2 parishes, were going through the kind of change that churches might be used to over 10 years, let alone over 1 month. Services cancelled and service times changed. Whole change in leadership, a new way of doing things. And then within a matter of weeks, all of the things that I try really hard in life to avoid, change and adaptation and innovation, all of those became front and center as we tried to figure out how to continue building community gathered around God's Word. Now, I know a lot of services moved online and moved to Zoom. Maybe your church did that too. All over the world, the Zoom platform became this artery for our work and our social interaction, for birthdays, for anniversaries, even for mourning the deaths of loved ones as they lay in hospitals. Suddenly, our grandparents and our great aunts and uncles were talking about this platform that only a few of us who might have been in a video conference once at work had heard about. And we decided to use that tool that everyone else was latching onto to start this new congregation. And it had a lot of challenges. The first one being, of course, to build a team. In some ways, building a team in that sort of situation was a little easier. I'm not a church planter. I don't pretend to know all there is to know about starting a new congregation. But I know that rule number 1 of ministry is typically this: you invest in people as a core team, and then you build around the gifts of those people that God has entrusted to that vision. We couldn't do that. On the other side of the world, all I had was faces on my screen. But what instead happened is that God brought together a whole group of people with similar convictions who were willing to do the job. We all of a sudden became task-focused rather than the old rulebook of ministry of being people-focused. And it meant we could get going pretty quickly. So we had the team, and then it wasn't even hard to gather the people. People were already looking for something to do online. People already had a consciousness that church had moved that way. When we first started back in June, people from all over the world, all over our state would tune in. I remember the day that we actually started that congregation. I was in hotel quarantine, my laptop perched on top of an ironing board on top of a sofa, Kirsten in the bedroom trying to keep her daughter quiet while they were playing and watching along. People at home managing all the technology, and then everyone tuning in, seeking community, seeking to gather around God's word. And our focus really was about building that community. We used chat rooms, we used the chat function. We tried to get people engaging with one another, caring for one another, even speaking to them throughout the week. And now we're 5 months down. And in that time, we've interacted with probably 90 people from all over the place on that medium. And many of those people had no formal connection to our parish. There's a demand for that online service to still be there, and it still will. We're going to keep trying to create community using this new format. But there's a demand for that physical element too. In the same way that our morning services have returned, in the same way that cafes and restaurants have opened up, so too do people want to stand shoulder to shoulder, albeit socially distanced, to worship God together. And so we're pivoting. And the time of innovation, the season of innovation, seems to be becoming a season of convention. And that might sound unappealing to you if you're someone that likes change and innovation. But we couldn't be more encouraged. We'll soon start, God willing, a physical service in the new year, and all of that will be built off of the back of what we did in taking risks, even in the midst of global pandemic. But I don't share this story with you because it's a novel one, or because I think we did something really great. I share this because I want to tell you that you don't have to be innovative to innovate. That's exactly what I think about myself. All you need is conviction. In our case, it was the conviction that God's people gathering around God's word is vital for the growth and movement of the church. And on top of that conviction, it's support. Having people around you who are willing to do foolish and risky things alongside you and back you, and we certainly had that too. But now as I look ahead to what's coming next and what's conventional, I think our team of people who started that service can look back and say we have been stretched in new ways, in good ways, that our willingness to innovate and do something novel and new all flowed out of our core principles. Christian community is an outflow of all that God has done in bringing us into his family through his Son. So what will it mean for you? Are you an innovative person? Do you shy away from that? As we move from the COVID to the post-COVID era, are you more open to innovation and adaptation? Or can you not wait to get back to the way things were before? Well, for us, it's about keeping the main things, but not being afraid of trying something new and something a little bit risky.